this is the idea. Krav Maga or any martial art or fighting system is an answer to a question, really. We're not just training for the sake of training, we're training for a purpose. Now, the better question that you ask and the more specific you are, the better answer you're going to get. Or, in other words, the more appropriate training is going to be. So, I guess let's start at the starting point that I think I've been training for most of my life. I've been training and my focus has been wrong. And that's a pretty big statement to be saying. But I'm not the only one, because this is the way that martial arts, that combat sports, without exception, are trained throughout the world and have probably been done so for a long time. So I wasn't alone in my I'd say focus. Now, every single martial art and combat sport, generally they ask the same question and they get the answer according to that. So the question is, who would win in a fight, right? The UFC came in the early days and asked asked that in a very interesting way, something that really had to be looked into. And they started pitting martial arts one against another. Who would win in a fight? Would the boxer beat the karate practitioner? Would the kung fu guy beat the jiu-jitsu guy? Wrestling versus sambo, and on and on and on we go. And that was a very good question to be asked, because people have been interested in that a long time, been training towards that in their martial arts. And I'm very fond of the UFC, and it's done a lot to develop our understanding of martial arts and hand-to-hand fighting or combat sport. And we got our answer eventually. The answer was that it wasn't one martial art. It was, you had to be versed in mixed martial arts as it got more and more developed. We found that it wasn't enough to be a specialist in jiu-jitsu. It wasn't enough just to be really good on striking. And it wasn't enough to have 15 black belts. You really had to be trained towards the rules and towards the style of fighting in mixed martial arts. So, but it's not only in mixed martial arts. In karate, it's always, who's the best karate fighter. In boxing, it's who's the best boxer. We're gonna pit out two people, equal skill set, same weight class, same skills, and we're going to see who's going to win. So that's the question that's always been asked, whether it was traditional martial arts, whether it's combat sports, boxing, wrestling. The question has been always, who would win in a fight? And if that's a question we ask, that gives us the answer to that question. Okay, it's not a bad question to be asking. It begs the higher question is, what's your aim? So I approached this one a little bit different. And in terms of, so we're talking in the combat sports, it's generally it's an evenly matched fight. It's two people, same skill set, same weight class, same set of rules, and they go in at one another. People ask the same thing about, so it begs the question, okay, so who would win in a street fight? Right? We pull out all the rules, we take it outside, we've got two guys, we're still talking about equal fighting, right? Nobody asks who would win a grandmother who's 80 years old and in today's circumstance trying to get her shopping bag full of toilet paper back to the car, or the professional MMA fighter. That's not really it. It's about, generally when we're talking about street fighting, we're talking about two thugs going at it in the parking lot over a parking space, or in a bar over an insult. And so this is still fighting, and it still has rules. And if you don't believe me, let's draw out a scenario. Two guys, pushing at each other in the let's go in the schoolyard. Everybody gets their phone out. They start taking pictures. They start video. They're going to post this later on WorldStar. and they're trading punches, and it's all nice and it's all well. Now one gets knocked on the ground, and the other one starts smashing their head into the pavement. Well, guess what? Everybody puts their phones away, calls the police, goes running. The rules have been violated, and everybody gets that in 1 second. So these are still fights. These are still fights, even though the rules aren't written down and stuff. It really goes into it. Yeah, Alex is saying grandma is a badass. My grandmother would definitely take him in a fight. She's tough as nails. Okay, so I approached this question a little bit different. Who would win in a fight? All right, so I'm a soldier. I've been a soldier since I was 18 years old, still actively serving in reserves. My father was a soldier, my grandfather was a soldier, and I'm not just talking about we sat behind desks filing paperwork. We've all been to combat, we've all fought in wars. Between my grandfather, my father, myself, and my brother, we did the calculations. We fought in every single war and major operation since the founding of Israel. And unfortunately, there have been quite a few. So that really affects my mindset in terms of training people to face violence. The school of violence that I learned was the military. And since the beginning of mankind, that's the body that was mandated to train and to work with violence in service of the civilian population, of course. Now, in a democracy. Now, okay, let's try this question in a military standpoint. Who would win? Army versus Marines? Air Force versus the Navy? British paratroopers versus American paratroopers? Now, whatever you come to that with, there's a bit of ego and a bit, you quickly understand that the question is meaningless. It has absolutely no value, right? In the Army, we know if we find ourselves in an equal conflict where it really depends on, it comes down to the skill set or the physical ability of each opposing side, then you've already majorly fucked up. Because equal in the military means mass casualties to your side. So in the Army, we do everything we can to get the advantage. Equal means strategic failure on our part. So in the military, it just doesn't come, because there's no such thing as equal to. All right. So what are the questions that we ask in the military? It's how do we get the advantage, right? Whether it's a technological advantage, whether it's firepower advantage, whether it's a psychological advantage, we're always going into the fight to better the odds on our side. And a good operation comes out with 0 casualties to your side and mission complete. So we also have to prepare for the worst, of course. So we're going to ask ourselves, what happens if we find ourselves outnumbered? What happens if we're outgunned? What happens if there's civilians in the area? How are we going to deal with that? How can we minimize civilian casualties? We go into objective and the situation is changed. How can we adapt to that? So in the Army, it's not, we don't train ourselves, just to win an unequal fight. We train ourselves for situations. And that, I believe, is in the heart of Krav Maga. And in the military also asks, of course, the question is, how can we train for that? So in a world of endless possibilities, where we're talking about different weapons, different abilities, different terrain, a different enemy, how do we prepare? How do we train ourselves and equip ourselves to deal with that? There's a joke in the Army that says that we're always training to win the last war, because every situation is different. And that's the job of military strategists, is to try to foresee and evaluate all potential threats and train for that, not to train for what has been. So if every combat sport, without exception, is asking who would win in an equal fight. We're going to pit this fighter against this fighter. They're both going to go in, maybe with different training, but the same weight class, the same ability, the same sort of chance going in. What do we ask in Krav Maga? So, if you're a Krav Maga instructor, you probably know the answer. You just don't know you know it. The question we ask in Krav Maga is what if? What if? What if somebody came at me with a knife? What if somebody grabbed me by the throat? What if I find myself having to protect my family against 2-3 people who broke into her house? What if somebody puts a gun to my head? What if? This is the idea of Krav Maga. It's never about, how can I beat, somebody in one-on-one combat? How can I have the best skills to go into a cage, to win a judo match, to win a wrestling competition? That's not really what it's about. And it's also because the idea of self-defense is that we're never going to find ourselves in an equal match. It's just not going to happen. Because the people I train, and the instructors I train, they back away. If somebody comes in and wants to start a fight, wants to push them around, we say thank you very much. We walk away with their ego intact. We don't need to fight to prove ourselves. Somebody comes in, slaps me in the face. I get punched in the face on a regular basis in training. So my heart doesn't skip a beat. My ego doesn't take a pounding, and I can say, you win, I'm out of here. So we don't find ourselves in equal matches. Where do we find ourselves? We find ourselves always at a disadvantage. Why? Well, because the person coming to attack us generally is not looking for an equal fight. They're looking to rob us. They could be looking to kill us. They could be looking to sexually assault us. Or a whole wide range of very unpleasant things. And when somebody chooses to rob somebody, they're not going around going, you know what? That guy looks big. He looks like he's trained. He's about my size. That looks like a good challenge. Let me try that out. That's not the mindset of the attacker. The attacker is looking for somebody smaller than them, or they're looking for somebody who's not paying attention, somebody who's out of their element, a tourist. They're looking for things that they can do to even the odds, whether they've got a weapon, whether they're with their friends, or maybe they're just off their face on ice. So we're always going to be facing a problem that's not an equal fight. It's not a one-on-one match, and that's why in Krav Maga we can't afford to be, thinking like the boxers or like the wrestlers or like the jiu-jitsu fighters or anybody who does competitive fighting or even martial arts to win that. Our focus needs to be different. And when I'm training people, it's not like, okay, so how do I take somebody, like me, that's strong and that's been training their whole life in martial arts, and what skill set am I going to give them? What type of training will I do with that person so that they can win somebody who's also been training their whole life in fighting? That's not interesting. That's not the question that we're here to answer in Krav Maga. The question is, what do I do with somebody without martial arts background, or somebody who's not particularly big? How can they defend themselves against somebody bigger and stronger than them? The idea is, how do I prepare somebody who's touring in Mexico and somebody comes and puts a knife to their throat and says, get in the car? How do we prepare for those situations? And that's the focus of Krav Maga. And that's the question that we're asking constantly. It's what if? What if this happened? What if that happened? What if this situation was there? And that's where I focus my training, and that's how I work with my instructors, and that's how my instructors work with their students as well. Is how do we give people the best tools that they are going to need in order to protect themselves against situations that they're likely going to find themselves in. I like to call Krav Maga, it's the science of options, because it's not one solution fits all. It's not somebody comes up to you and puts a gun in your face, then you must do this, right? So you're in an alley, somebody comes in, sticks a knife to your throat. What do? You give them your money? Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. That's reasonable. What if they say get in the car with me? The answer is it depends. It depends. It's going to depend on the situation. Everywhere it's going to be different. It depends on your readiness and your ability. It depends on the attacker. So our job is to give you options. It's not that I always have to fight. Not that fighting or even self-defense, sometimes complying is the right answer. But if you don't have the training, if you don't have the preparation, it's going to be very, very high risk. So our job as Krav Maga instructor is to put that option on the table, to give you the option that if you have to fight, if you're in a situation where that you feel that is the right call to action, that you have the skill set to save your life in any situation you can reasonably find yourself. And to that end, we never stop training, right? We're never good enough, because the situations are also never ending. And it's not different. It's not very different from what we do in the army as well, right? I'm not training MMA fighters as a Krav Maga instructor. I'm not training people who've been doing sport fighting their whole life to become black belts in Krav Maga. Often people get this wrong, right? I've seen people advertise, I've been a bouncer for 20 years, been involved in 70 street fights. I know the truth about violence, special forces, Navy SEALs, whatever. I've trained with a lot of Navy SEALs. I've trained with all levels. The truth is, you don't need to be at a very high level of hand-to-hand combat system of Krav Maga to be special forces, and most of them aren't, and that's okay, because it's part of the skill set, right? They're not MMA fighters. They're not training it's not their profession. They're not training every day for 8 hours a day in martial arts, and they're going to be doing it for years for their career. They've got to shoot. That's their primary skill. They've got to be really, really good at shooting. They've got to be good at strategy. They've got to be good at close quarter combatives in urban environments. They've got to have a very, very wide skill set, where Krav Maga is part of it. So even then, when I'm working with soldiers, and I'm working with the highest level of soldiers, of giving them specific skills to meet their operation demands that they have, but I'm not trying to make them black belts, and I don't have the time either that I spend training with them, and I spend developing with them. I'm trying to go in and, as quick as possible, give them as much important skills that they need to in order to keep themselves safe, in order to complete their missions and their operations. And that's why Krav Maga is perfect. It mixes so well into civilian applications, because your goal in Krav Maga is not to become professional fighters. It's to meet the operational objectives that are in front of us. As a civilian, it means staying alive, protecting our loved ones. Okay. So that is very unique for us in Krav Maga, and it's amazing. We've got such good pedigree in terms of Krav Maga. Krav Maga was developed by Imi Lichtenfeld, who is a professional boxer and a wrestler. Very, very high level skill set. And both of these skills, by the way, we're seeing now through the questions asked in mixed martial arts, we're seeing that these are two of the most dominant fighting styles. They're very, very good fighting sports. Yes, they're designed for one-on-one combat. Yes, they're designed to fight people of equal weight. I do not, if you're 45 kilos, I do not recommend you try to outbox a 100-kilo guy. It's not going to end well for you. Doesn't matter how good your skill set are. I'm not even going to go into wrestling. But the movements and the foundations are phenomenal, and that's what Imi did. Imi took these foundations of competitive fighting, and he built on them self-defense abilities. So if you look at, we've got our house, and underneath that we've got our foundations. So you got to have good foundations to build a solid house, but the foundations aren't it. So that's why in Krav Maga we do grappling, we do boxing, but that's not the purpose. The goal of Krav Maga is not to be a average level boxer. The goal in Krav Maga is to survive. To survive what? To survive any reasonable situation that you find yourself in. So we've been doing a lot of that sort of training, and I've been adapting also my mindset and the way of training, because like I said, the way I grew up and the way I think anybody who's been in the martial arts for many years grew up, it was always focused on, you know, who would win in a fight, how to win in a fight. But you can't win. You find yourself in a slum overseas, and you're approached by, you know, 4 people who want to do you harm. You're not going to win. You're going to survive, and that's a different mindset altogether. And it's something we've been doing also in terms of the mindset. So let's say from the very basic level, one problem that we beginners learn in their very first lesson in Krav Maga, what to do is somebody grabs you by the throat. Okay, so I remove the hands and I start striking, and I need to get away. Because if now I'm in the mindset of, okay, I need to attack and I need to win this fight, I'm going to get their hands off my throat, I'm going to start punching them, elbowing them, kneeing them, headbutting. Well, guess what? If they're tough and they're strong and they haven't gone down, you've lost elements of surprise. And very quickly they're going to start shaking it off, and now you're in a fight. And remember, we said this is a person who's got an advantage on you. They're bigger than you, maybe they've got a knife in their pocket, who knows? But you find yourself in an equal fight. We said in the military, an equal fight means casualties to your side. In the civilian aspect, it means injuries and risk of death. So our aspect is the moment we get grabbed, the moment we attack, it's not kill, 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 it's not win. It's do whatever is necessary to be able to disengage from the situation. So when people ask, what's the goal of, how do you win in boxing? Well, I knock out my opponent, I win on points at the end of the match. How do I win in wrestling? I pin somebody down. In jiu-jitsu, I get a dominant position, I win on points, I manage to get a submission. How do we win in Krav Maga? And don't say, everybody says survive, but that's wrong, because at some point everybody dies. So surviving isn't, you know, I hate to break it to you, but at some point you will lose this battle to Mother Nature. So how do we win in Krav Maga? By disengaging, right? I do whatever's necessary. I can punch, I can elbow, I can hit, I can headbutt. I disengage, and that should always be my focus, because being there trying to win is going to put you at a much greater risk. Okay, I do this example sometimes to really bring the point home with my instructors. I show them a situation where somebody's coming at them, stabbing them, and I say, okay, drop down, just fall on the floor when somebody's attacking. And we find that we can keep somebody fairly okay away from us and safely by kicking them, by us being on their back and them standing up, just by using our feet to kick at their knees, kick at their groin, kick at their face if they get too close, to keep them from coming in to stabbing us. And we can maintain that for a good 10, 15, 20 seconds. And in the street, that's plenty. Because remember, the situation, somebody's got a knife, they're trying to stab you, they're trying to attack you, and they're exposed, and people are coming through, they're watching, or you're shouting, and they're only going to be comfortable for so long trying to get at you. So all you need to survive that situation for 10, 15 seconds. Let's change that around. Let's say, okay, I found myself on the ground, somebody's at me with a knife, and now I'm going to try to get back on my feet. As they're still coming at me, I'm going to try to kick them away from me. I'm going to try to close the distance, grab onto the knife, and disarm them by whatever fancy techniques I've got. Well, you're going to be in a very, very good risk of getting yourself cut up really badly. So if I stay in the mindset of surviving the situation, sometimes it just means creating a stalemate, biding the time, letting the momentum of the attack kind of die down, and the attacker kind of realizes that things didn't go their way. Sometimes that's better off than than trying to, defeat somebody that's got a weapon or that outmatches you considerably in size. And that's it. But like we said, it's the science of options. Not one thing is going to hold true. If we've got two people trying to kick your head in, well, you've got no choice. You've got to get up from the ground. All right, so that's a little bit about kind of our understanding of Krav Maga and how these things are fundamental. That you got to have them in terms of when you're teaching, when you're training Krav Maga. Otherwise, you're training for the wrong thing. You're really training. You're training to win a one-on-one match, and I approach everything I do from a point of humility, in terms of understanding that winning might not be possible. I've been training my whole life in Krav Maga. I'm a combat soldier. I've been to war. I'm fairly skilled as far as it comes in facing valves. I've spent a long time training and thinking about it, and I'm very aware that I would not like to find myself in a situation where somebody's coming at me with a knife, where somebody puts a gun in my face. Even though I've trained for this my whole life, I understand that there's always a possibility that things won't go my way, that I'm going to be surprised, and the outcomes can be fatal. So if we approach with the idea of humility, we understand that winning isn't always an option, and we prepare ourselves to survive the immediate situation and to be able to disengage ourselves. Okay, so that's the idea. Am I saying that there's no value in training in other fighting styles? I'm not saying that. Am I saying that boxing is bullshit? That jiu-jitsu is bullshit? No, I love boxing. I love jiu-jitsu. I love these things, and I train them, and they're a lot of fun. But they're not self-defense, and they can be counterproductive to an extent, as long as if you don't understand where you're going. All right, there was a good video on years ago. It was I think it was Fight Quest or Fight Human Weapon, I think it was, and they put some fighters came to Israel, and they did their training, and one was an MMA fighter. He was he had some kickboxing training, and he had to go up against somebody with a knife, and his training naturally took him. He went to where he was strong. He clinched, and he started throwing knees. Well, guess what? When you try to clinch against somebody who's got a knife in their hand, they're going to make a lot of holes in you. So this really puts a concept of, if we're training for a very particular style of fighting, if we're training to win in certain, that can be fatal. It can be fatal if we're put in a situation that's counter to that training. So in Krav Maga, our focus needs to be true. It needs to be about how to disengage, and what if this happened, what if that happened, and not about winning. So, and that's the idea. Okay, so I'm going to go into a few questions that I've been asked. I've got them over here. If you have more questions as I'm going through them, I can see your messages getting typed down. So if you have any questions you want to hit me with, just write them below, and if I'll do my best to address what's asked. Okay, Joe, I saw that you came on and you wanted to know if your question had been addressed. So no, I haven't addressed it yet, and I'm going to start with you, Joe. So Joe asks, is there a particular level IDF recruits and members have to attain while in service? So Joe's from Indonesia. He's a firearms instructor. He's a hand-to-hand combat instructor, and he says that recruits have to be at least yellow belt while in service and black belt to qualify for special forces. Lastly, do all units have their own Krav Maga, or is all Krav Maga regulated from IDF curriculum, from Army, Navy to Air Force, etc.? All right, so that's a good question. I touched on it very briefly before. In the Israeli army, it's an interesting one, because we have mandatory service in the army. That means everybody has to go into the, I call it army in the States, they might call it military. In Israel, this is interchangeable. But every civilian goes into the Israeli military when they're 18 years old. The men do 3 years, the women do 2 years. And now you got to understand, when a military is compulsory, everybody goes into the military. Well, you can expect this is from across the population. Not everybody's fit. Not everybody has the ability or the mental fortitude to be a combat soldier. People have asthma, people have health conditions, some people are just weak and lazy. And they go into the army too. And we need to the army takes everybody in. So I think in every army, I've heard the statistics, and I don't think it's untrue. I haven't done the math. They say only 10% of the military are the war fighters, right? The people who actually fight and are in combat and have the, and fight and do what the stuff that we see in the movies. Although don't get me started, movies are not a good example of what it's really like to be a combat soldier. Okay, but we have everybody else. So it's different. For example, in Australia or in America, if you want to go into the military, well, you have to apply and you have to pass selections and you have to do training, and not everybody gets in. In fact, it's very, very difficult to get into the military in Australia at the moment. And there's a lot of things you have to do in order to qualify: health tests, fitness tests, aptitude tests, and so on. In the Israeli army, you have to do a lot of selections, a lot of testing if you want to be combat, if you want to be special forces. But most of the people in the army, like we said, the 90%, they're clerks. They work in stock rooms. They work in IT. We have a term for this in Israel. We call it the combat soldiers. We call it jobnikim. Jobnikim from the word job, which means it's like a 9 to 5. They go to the base. Sometimes it's in Tel Aviv. They do their 9 to 5 and they go back home, and that's their service. So the training that they get, Joe, is maybe things have changed since I originally. Me and people my age were going through a boot camp, but back in the days it was a boot camp of about 2 weeks for the lowest level of recruits. They maybe got to fire 5 rounds of an Uzi. Back then they were shooting Uzis because they were old weapons that we didn't really use, so just so they got the feeling of what it's like to be a soldier, and they'd never see a weapon again for their entire service. They'd be on uniform, they'd be catching the bus with everybody to work to their base and coming back every day. So that's one level of soldier. Maybe they get a few Krav Maga lessons throughout, and that's important because soldiers are targets, and I think this has changed much more since the time I was working with recruits, because soldiers are often the target of terrorist attacks. So they're getting more and more Krav Maga training these days, but it's at a fundamental level because most of the time they're just they're in Tel Aviv, they're in civilian population, they're not really going into any war zones and things like that. The women get a lot of, they get training, rape prevention, things like that. They're quite critical in Krav Maga, but it's at a very, very basic level. So we don't really have like belts and things like that in the army, but I would say, 10, 15 lessons, maybe a little bit more, but not much more than that. So if you can put that in perspective, that's a very beginner level of Krav Maga. Right? Then we go up. We have different units. The artillery, the armored corps. These guys are already, let's say, the first level of combat soldiers that go into fighting. But take what I say with a grain of salt, because there's always a little bit of fun and rivalry. But the armored corps are in their tanks and stuff, so they're not really coming. So they get a certain level of infantry skills, because the infantry skills aren't as important. I'm a paratrooper, an infantryman. My specialty was infantry skills. We got trained how to shoot. We got trained how to do a lot of Krav Maga. We got trained on all these things. I would not know any better than any of you of how to load a shell into a fucking tank. I do not know how to drive a tank. I've been in a tank a handful of times, but that's not the skill set that I was required to know. The artillery corps, the armored corps, that's their bread and butter. Most of the training goes on that, and they get also infantry skills because they're in combat, they're in the front lines, and they need to be able to act as an infantry unit to some extent as well. Okay, we've got our in Hebrew we in Israel it's called how do I translate this our assistants or combat assistants. So these are people who are in the front line, but they're not fighters. They can be mechanics. They can be intelligent operators. So they're in the forward operating bases, but they're not going on patrol. Not that it's that safe to be in those bases either. It's still the front line. It still can be a dangerous place. So they get a different level of training. So Joe, in answer to your question, the training differs. It depends on the level. Hey, you want to go, if you really want to go extreme, I used to volunteer with kids with Down syndrome, with cerebral palsy, with various levels of cognition difficulties, and we have programs in the Israeli army that make place for them as well. No, we don't send them a special forces unit. You know, they have, although I've seen the state of some unit, no, not really. But so we find a way in the Israeli army to have them be a part and to contribute as well. Whether it's folding uniforms, whether it's but it's really for us in Israel. We say the military builds the nation, and the nation builds the military. It goes back and forth. It's part of who we are, what we do. So it's important everybody can find their place in it as much as possible. Okay, and of course, yeah, our special forces units get a lot of Krav Maga training. But again, it's not about black belts. So if you're training with me, it'll take you about 10 years to get your black belt, and that's if you're good. People ask, how long does it take the average person to get a black belt? Well, the average person does not make it to black belt, does not get a black belt. Ask Rita, ask Takuri, some of the guys who are training not far off from their black belts. Ask Jared. It takes years and years and years of training. Well, the special forces operator in special forces, it's generally a 2 year, depending on the unit. It's 2 years training and to go to the field, and Krav Maga is only a part of that. So definitely not, let's say, black belt level, but also the things that they're training for is different. I do a lot of training with them. Well, most of it is how to use their weapon, how to use their weapon to block, how to use their weapon to strike. We do a lot of that because the combat soldiers always have their weapon on them when they're in the field. It's a very bad situation if they find themselves without the weapon. We train for that as well. In civilian, we don't train. I don't train my students in Australia or in Tel Aviv even on how to use an M16 to hit people and to use that to block against a knife, against an axe, because it's not a skill set that's required. Our time is much better focused on footwork, on striking, on the things that they're going to face. So Joe, I hope I answered your question on that one. You asked about if Krav Maga is mandated the same throughout all units of all branches of the Israeli military. The question is yes. The base is, so the Krav Maga, kind of where it sits and lives, it's in the Wingate base. That's where instructors are certified, and then from there instructors go out to the entire military. The head of the Krav Maga in the IDF, a very good friend of mine, has done amazing work over the last few years. He's been in the position. He trains and supports the soldiers regularly. He adapts the syllabus to training, and everybody in the Israeli army, generally the heart, it comes from the headquarters in Wingate, and then from there it goes out. We also use Krav Maga in the police, in the Shin Bet, in the Mossad, in the different security branches of Israel. They have their own branches of Krav Maga, but these are it comes from instructors who were instructors in the Israeli army, and it's connected as well. So there really is one, I would say, there's Krav Maga. There's many different teachers, many different approaches, even the civilian aspect. I don't see there's no such thing as, people ask me, or people like to say, well, that's what they're doing. That's not really Krav Maga. That's not true Krav Maga. I've been doing Krav Maga for almost 30 years. I have no idea what true Krav Maga, what that means in that phrase. There is Krav Maga. It's not just a generic name for martial arts in Israel. There is a system. It came out of the Israeli army. It was it was IMI was a primary figure in its development. Then from there it came into civilian aspect. There's a syllabus, there's a curriculum, there are techniques, but a lot of phenomenal trainers all over the world. And every trainer and every organization has different methodology, maybe a little bit of variance in techniques, a different way they go at it, and it's all valuable. And there's no way, you can't say this is Krav Maga, this isn't Krav Maga, this is more pure Krav Maga, this isn't pure Krav Maga. That wasn't the intention of IMI, and that's not how Krav Maga works. Krav Maga is an answer to a question. The question is what if. Maybe your answer is like this, my answer is like that, but it's really, it's having the different voices, I think, are valuable. It wouldn't be a very good system if there was just one place and that's the place, and everything they say go and everything else is not important or is bullshit. I think it's very valuable that we have different instructors, people come in with different aspects, but don't get me wrong, there is Krav Maga. It's not that, you know, you're a boxing instructor, you do some knife defenses, or you saw a few nice videos, or maybe, you know, you're a fantastic jiu-jitsu instructor and now you incorporate a bit of self-defense and you go, well, this is Krav Maga. No, it's not. And by the way, that doesn't say that it's worse or better. Something being Krav Maga, I've been around, I've seen judo instructors, Israeli judo instructors come in and, you know, teach their style with a bit of additions and go, Krav Maga, this is Krav Maga. And it's not, because there's a certain channel. Like, I mean, you know, either you train in Krav Maga or you haven't. But by the way, that's not saying that it's any better or worse. People ask me, oh, what about this? Is that, you know, I can say, okay, that where did the knowledge come from? If it's not directed into the Israeli army, if it's not directed into the teachings of IMI, then that's not Krav Maga. But it's not to say that it's better, it's worse. I don't know about it. I've never trained in it. There was, we won't go too much into the politics of it, but at the end of the day, I think all the voices are valuable, and anything you can take into it, anything you can learn, it just makes you better. Okay, yeah, Joe. Yeah, the real Krav Maga issue, it's definitely one that comes up, and I think that I mean, when I hear Krav Maga instructor going, well, that's bullshit, and that's not really Krav Maga, and that's what I hear is insecurity. I hear this false sense of whatever it is going, you know, everything else is a threat to me. This is true. I'm the true one. Everything else is bullshit. You know, the more that I train and the better I become, the more humble I am. The more I realize that there's so much that I don't know, and that there's so much more to train. And when somebody says, well, if you do that knife defense, you're just going to end up getting yourself killed, my question is, how do you know? Right? How do you know? What makes you so sure? You think you know all aspects of getting attacked with a knife, all aspects of training every single person? What makes you so sure? So I never come and say, this is the way it's got to be done, everything else is suicide, or that's bullshit. I said, this is the way I do it. If it has value to it, if you understand my logic, good, do it. If it doesn't work for you, okay, talk to me, we can work through it, or find some way that works for you. But I don't have all the truth. And anybody who thinks that they have all the truth, it just means that there's so much that they don't understand yet. Okay. Let's go through questions in the topic. Ethan is asking, do you teach Mossad? I bet that's classified. It is. No standard basic training for NCO ranks regardless of role and corps. Is that like the Aussie Army? I'm not. If you can clarify that question a little bit more, I'll get into that. But yeah, there is a stand. Okay. I hear what you. Yeah. Okay, I got you. That's a good question. So no, there isn't a standard basic training that everybody goes through. Right? In the Marines, if you're a Marine, you're a Marine. Doesn't matter what you do. You could be you know, flying a desk in the Marines, but you've gone through Marine training and you have the fighting ability of a Marine. No, in the IDF, the boot camp, the training is, especially in the combat units, it's organic. So that means I go into unit. I'm going to go with the same group, with the same company. I'm going to go through my boot camp that goes on for 4 months. Then I go into advanced infantry training with the same unit. That's for 2 months, and then from there we have specialty training, special forces, and so on. And then I deploy with that unit. So I can do the same spirit. And a lot of the guys that I've trained with, I've been fighting alongside since I was 18 years old. I'm pushing 40 now, and we've been fighting the same. I've been training. We you become brothers, and so that's generally it. That's for fighting units. Fighting units, we go through the same training. It's not like everybody goes into one boot camp and then they get sent to different branches or to the different units. We go through it organically. For the non-combatant, for the jobnikim, like I referred to before, I think that's a bit more general. That's not my specialty. I work mostly with combat soldiers, but I think they do have a more generalized boot camp, and then from there they go into their training. There is levels of boot camp. For example, we have 0-0. I'm not sure even that exists, but that's the boot camp that I was talking about, with just a few, just 2 weeks of training, and then it goes up to 0-3, 0-5, 0-7. 0-7 is already infantry. 0-8, 0-9, 0-12 is officers. So there are levels of we'd call it infantry skills or something that you get trained on. Let's have a look. All right, so Janelle says, I have a real fear of getting hit and punched in the head and the face, so I've been scared to do Fight Club classes. That's our sparring classes down in Surrey Hills. So she's asking, do I have a way to work on that? So Janelle, that's a very natural, very natural fear and reservation to have, getting punched in the face. It's been passed down through your ancestors. So your ancestors managed to survive because they avoided getting punched in the face. That being said, it's a compulsory part of. I mean, if you want to train for combat, it's a very real likelihood that you're going to get hit. So the important thing to do that is the best way to do that is to be introduced into sparring gradually. That's not the way I was taught, by the way. When I was a kid in Israel, things are a little bit different. I think they've changed since. They gave us a pair of gloves and they said, just go at it. Mouth guards only came in a bit later, by the way. And we would smash each other. At 14 years old, I got thrown into the adults classes. I was training with 30-year-olds, and Netanya is a bit of a rough city, so nobody holds back. So, I was thrown straight into the fire, and I think my training suffered from that. Truly, yeah, it makes you harder, it makes you tougher, but doesn't necessarily make you better. The best way to train for full contact sparring is gradually. That means you start with pad drills. You start working with a partner. You start getting used to working on the focus pads. You start going in classes. You get used to the bit of contact. And then from there, a little bit of sparring drills. So you can have, for example, sparring drills that we do is, your opponent is only jabbing nice and lightly, and you're working on just defending just a jab, just working on one skill. So you have more control of that. And as you get through, we can up the drills that we're doing for a little bit more contact, a little bit more pressure, while you always maintain some feeling of control and you're not getting overwhelmed. And as you do this gradually, very quickly, you'll find that you can withstand more pressure and you feel you have more control over it. And through that, you get hit a little bit and you get more conditioned to it. And and after you're doing it for many years, or after you've got a good solid ability of it, hey, it doesn't hurt. You don't really flinch. It doesn't really wear off that much. Now, you don't need to be an excellent boxer. You don't need to be fantastic at sparring to be able to defend yourself or protect yourself. But there is value of being able to work under pressure, because in reality, if somebody really tries to hit you, it's going to be very, very different from just hitting a bag or working with a cooperative partner. So I recommend it, and you're in good hands, because at KMDI we have the best team and the best training methods of taking absolute beginners and building them gradually into that. So for you specifically, Janelle, come to the Krav Maga Combatives class. Work on your striking. Get into the drills. Get to where you're comfortable, and then talk to your instructor about when's appropriate for you to jump into the fight club. And when you do, I mean, we've got such a good crowd, and if you're listening to this from wherever you are, it's critical you find a Krav Maga school with a great community that's going to look after you. That you know that if you're going to jump into a sparring class, you know that people aren't just going to try to hurt you. That people are going to look after you and they nurture beginners. And I have to say that most, not all, but most of the Krav Maga schools have come across around the world. They have very good cultures, and you are in good hands. Okay, let's look if I missed a few other questions, and if not, we're going to go into that. Guys, thank you. Keep it coming. It's awesome to have these questions. Hendrik's been enjoying the online sessions we've been putting through. Gabby saying no problem training, it's a problem getting any work done from home. Sorry, can't help you with that. Okay, and okay, cool. All right, so let me address some of the other questions that were asked before on our messages, if I can bring them up. Okay, this is a good one. So Krav Maga is intended to be an evolving art. How does what is taught today differ from the Krav Maga Imi taught 50 years ago? Fantastic question. Excellent question. Okay, so Mike Tyson, I saw an interview once with Mike Tyson, and Mike Tyson was asked, the fighters nowadays, you see, all these heavyweight champions, he says, in your prime, do you think you could have beat them, you could have taken them? And Tyson says no. And so the interview goes, really? What do you mean? You're one of the greatest of all time. I mean, Tyson was amazing. It was amazing, world class. Even today, you see his stuff. So what does he mean that he wouldn't be able to beat some of the best fighters today? So he says this. He says, well, back in my days, we didn't know what they know now. We didn't have access to the science that we have about nutrition, about training methods. We didn't have any of that. So I was the best with what I had. But if he had access to the I have no doubt if he had access to the knowledge we have today, he would still been one of the best. But back then he didn't. He was the best with what was available, back then. And we see the same thing in all aspects of competitive sports that are measurable, right? Every year, world records, Olympic records are getting smashed, or getting beaten. It's not that the athletes are any tougher, or have better genetics than they did 5 years ago, or even 2 years ago. It's that the technology and the science that goes into training is evolving. And we have better ways of training athletes, of getting the nutrition. We have psychological coaches. We have all these things that make the fighters better and better that the athletes didn't have back then. So I think Krav Maga today is very different from what was trained back then to what Imi was doing. I think Krav Maga is incredibly better. And that's not detractory to Imi and to his students, and to that's very much in their praise. I think Imi was brilliant in the way that he designed and he built the system that it could evolve and it could keep on growing. Krav Maga is not a traditional martial arts where in certain forms of kung fu or aikido, or you choose, there's a way to do things. This is the way the master did it, and this is how it's done. And maybe if you're a direct student of the master, then maybe you know a little bit better because it wasn't broken tough, and you know the perfect way or the best way to do the technique. Krav Maga isn't like that, and Krav Maga is much better, much more involved than the way Imi was practicing then. But the things that haven't changed were the principles. The principles are exactly the same. The idea, the concepts that he put in motion continue to guide us into where we take the system and how we work with. And more often than not, I find myself going back to some of the basic Krav Maga techniques and to some of the concepts, and that kind of inspires and drives the stuff that we do. If more than anything, I find a lot of times I'm going back to to the origins and to our understanding. A bit earlier, I spoke about that Krav Maga is not designed to answer the question who would win in a fight. Well, Imi was a boxer and a wrestler, and he purposely didn't teach a lot of these skills to his direct students. He didn't make them very good boxers. He didn't give them a very solid foundation grounding. He was very, very concerned about giving them good skills in self-defense. And also, there was an influence back then. So this is the second part of your question. There was a very influence back then. Krav Maga was finding its way, where it belonged, because there was combat sports, there was martial arts. There wasn't really something, and there were self-defense systems practiced in the military and whatnot, but that wasn't really like formulated and set. So there was a lot of influences Krav Maga early days from traditional martial arts. They used to wear gis, they had belts, they bowed, and a lot of the influences we still have these today, and that's not a bad thing, because you don't need to reinvent the wheel everywhere. We use belts in KMDI, we use belts in Israel. It comes from traditional martial arts. We didn't invent the belts, that's a judo thing. So why? Because it works. Because the belts, the levels are an excellent tool to get people to train, and to get people to train harder, to set goals, to celebrate those goals, to mark them. And it keeps the system honest too, right? If I've got somebody who's walking around in my gym with a brown belt, well, they better be able to match that with their skills, because everybody sees that. So if I've made you a black belt and you're not at the level, that doesn't just reflect on me, it reflects on, that doesn't just reflect on you, it reflects on me too. So I need to train you better, and I need to work with you as well. So the traditional is good, as long as we know the purpose and what we're working towards. So you see a lot of influences through traditional martial art, through traditional Krav Maga, or its origins back in Imi days, and it's gone and it's developed into a phenomenal system. Without a doubt, it is the best answer I've come across to train everyday ordinary people to protect themselves against violence. It's also, without a doubt, the best way I've come across to train soldiers to protect themselves using their hands, using their weapon as using their gun as a cold weapon. So yeah, Krav Maga is different. I think if Imi landed, or if Imi's looking from above at us, I think he'd be very happy with what he's seeing. But the training methods, the techniques, some of them are the same, a lot of them are different, and I think better. And I said previously, every instructor, every federation, people take into different directions, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, right? We want to have more voices, because then we educate and we train ourselves. So I'm third generation Krav Maga instructor. I when I grew up training in Israel, Imi was still around. He wasn't teaching very much anymore. But I grew up third generation Krav Maga instructor here in Israel, and those are my colleagues, and those are the training partners, and those are the people who I work with the most. And what we found is we work a lot together, and that's kind of our message. If the previous generation, everybody was going up, setting up their federations and going, I'm the true Krav Maga, I'm the heir of Imi Lichtenfeld, I was his right hand man, I was his first black belt, I was training with him everybody had their own claim to fame, and why they had the truth. I find that my generation of Krav Maga instructors, we more are looking to unify. Not as terms of federation, organization, everybody has their own abilities and structures and ways to bring out Krav Maga to the people, but in terms of training together and drawing information from one another, bouncing ideas together, working together, and that's one of the phenomenal things I get from being in Israel. I get to work with some of my best friends and colleagues, Ron Rotem, Dani Netzer, Ran Nakash, Itai, Amit Porat, Avivit. Like we've got such a wealth of fantastic third generation instructors here in Israel. Everybody comes into it with their own experiences, their own aspects of it, and we're that much richer for that, which is what makes Krav Maga phenomenal phenomenal system. So I'm very optimistic. I really like the journey we've gone, and I really like what's up ahead, and it's interesting. On that note, a friend of mine who's currently the head of Krav Maga in the IDF, he has been for a while. We said the things that we asked about what if. Well, during the last big round in Gaza a few years ago, just before that, a unit, a special engineering, combat engineering, came to him and said, we need a training program to be able to do Krav Maga and hand-to-hand combat in a tunnel where we can't really move, where we crouch down, sometimes we're crawling, and we'll face the enemy face to face in a closed quarter environment where literally you can't stand up. How do you fight in that type of situation? Because this is something that the soldiers were facing, and that's one of the challenges of Krav Maga, but it's also the beauty that it can be adapted for every situation. We go back, we may not have the answer, but we go back to our principles, and we go back to our ideas, and we say, okay, how can we take what we have and what we know in order to answer this question, right? We said Krav Maga, it doesn't ask who would win in a fight, it asks what if. So what if? What if the soldier found himself in this situation? How can we draw onto the knowledge and to tools we already have, or what tools and knowledge do we have to develop in order to train soldiers for that? And at our level, it's not just about like what do you do, but it's also what is the skill set, what will the training look like, what drills do we put in place, what's reasonable, right? What I can do after a few decades of Krav Maga training is not the same as what you're going to be able to do, right? So how can I adapt the training to be able to, so that not only it meets the demands that you need, but also that you personally will be able to do that. So that's something we focus very much on Krav Maga, and we go forward. Okay, keep on hitting me up in questions. We'll go for just a little bit more. If you're tuning in through the middle, make sure once we finish, go back, watch the early phases. We had quite a interesting talks about what the purpose of Krav Maga is, and what everybody, including myself, initially gets wrong when they're training Krav Maga. So make sure you tune in and you watch that. So I've got a question here from one of our Instagram groups. It says that they've been doing Krav Maga, but they're struggling with the conditioning exercises because they're a bit on the heavier side advice. So people often ask, what should I do preparing for Krav Maga? Or how can I best get fit into training Krav Maga? So a lot of people say, I don't want to start Krav Maga. I've been dying to do Krav Maga, but I want to get fit. First, I want to get myself in a good position so that I don't just, make a fool of myself or whatnot. So my answer to that is, again, I draw my knowledge back from the army, because that's how I learned to be a fighter. That was my school of combat. And in the army, you don't have to be, in the Israeli army, you don't have to be exceptionally fit in order to join. Yeah, you have to have some level of physical ability, yeah, but you don't need to be in athletic conditioning, not even to join the special forces, by the way. You have to pass the selection, and I've done selections, and in selections what we look for is less your physical aptitude, because that we can build, right? We're dealing with 18-year-olds. You can train them to do anything. They lose weight like that, they become strong, their bodies are very physically adaptive. So what they go into, it's not like, within 1 month it's going to be different. What we're looking is for psychological aptitude, how strong they are, how we can take them to their breaking point, and whether they're going to choose to go on and to push on beyond that. Richard Branson, he said that he doesn't hire people to virgin based on their skill sets or what they already know or their training. He hires them based on their personality, because anybody can be taught skills, but personality is almost impossible to change. So that's what we do in the army. We take people who are strong up here into the elite units, and yeah, they have to have a certain level of physical ability, otherwise they're just not going to be able to function. but we get them fit very, very fast. So we say you don't have to be fit to join. We'll get you fit, as long as you don't quit on us. So the same thing I say to anybody looking to take up uh, Krav Maga. You don't need to be fit to join, and you're going to get fit doing Krav Maga. So if you're thinking about doing it, just do it. Just get into that. And if you think that you're making a fool of yourself, well, you're not, because I, as an instructor, have a lot of respect. I have a lot of respect for somebody who's going in there and is struggling and is giving them all their all, and is not giving up, and and doing what they can. And if we're doing 40 push-ups and you can do 5, okay, excellent. You push them hard. Is nobody's going to look down on you on that. But very quickly you're going to get better and you get stronger and you're going to get motivated, and that's the key. So I would say if you're struggling conditioning wise, just keep at it. Just do what you can. Just keep on going. Struggle is good. You should always be struggling. If your training doesn't challenge you, you're not growing. Alex, I love Alex's comments. We talk about this stuff a lot. He says it's about resilience, not fitness. The fitness will come. And I can't agree anymore about that. It's about how strong you are up here and how you can get going. Physical fitness is that's just the body. You do the work, it'll come to you. So that's my advice. Okay, guys, I think we're gonna wrap this one up. I wanted to thank you for joining me. This is going to be the first of a few. Now that we're here in isolation, then this is the best way for me to get at you. I have to say that we've been wanting to do this for a long time. Myself, Jared, and the rest of the KMDI crew and the Krav Maga Israel family, we've been wanting to get information, to get stuff out to you virtually. So it took the coronavirus to get us in front of our cameras. This isn't where we're naturally. I think none of us are really comfortable in front of the cameras yet, but we're going to get there. And yeah, I love this. I love the questions and the support that we've been getting from the Krav Maga family. A lot in Australia, the KMDI family, and from around the world has been phenomenal. It's really helped. It's been a tough time. We've had, Krav Maga Israel. At the moment, all tourism is off, so our groups aren't coming for now. The moment we get it up and running, we're going to hit it, and we're going to hit it really hard, and we're going to start putting out camps for everybody who wanted to come and had to miss out. Well, we're not going anywhere, and the moment we can, we're going to run the camps and the KMDI gyms, who we've been ordered by the government to close their doors, and it's important for us to do everything we can to maintain our responsibility to our community, because that's a part of who we are. So we're going to do everything we can to keep our students and to keep our society safe, and we encourage you to do the same thing. Stay indoors. Don't be an idiot. Don't put other people at risk. And we're going to keep on coming at you with excellent content. So we had an online training session yesterday. I did it from right here in Israel. I'm going to do another one tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. So make sure you join me from that. Jared's been doing the 3 p.m. live sessions of groundwork, and we're going to keep it coming to you guys all the time as long as we can. We're going to keep on pumping out workouts for you to do at home. We're going to have opportunities for you to interact with us, to talk to us live, and yeah, hit me up. Any questions you have, anything you want me to address in future sessions, any feedback that you have, let me know. And guys, stay strong. Keep on training. I want to leave you with one thing I want to say. Try to maintain a regular schedule as much as you can, because that's what's going to keep you sane. That schedule's got to include training. Now that if you're at home, you've got no excuse. Train every single day. Every day. It doesn't have to be, it can be 20 minutes. Do something to boost your immune system, to drive your endorphins, to make yourself feel better. It's not just physically, it's also up here. The battle is emotionally. And it's hard. It's a hard time of uncertainty for all of us. And the best thing that you can do going into a fight is to be prepared for it up here. And training and physical fitness and getting the blood going is the best way I know to do that. So keep on training, eat healthy, and this isn't an excuse to just sit on the couch and veg out. Take the downtime you've been given and make something valuable with it. That's what we're doing, and I hope you find a way to do that as well. A lot of love. Miss you guys in Australia. Uh, I've been asked in the chat, when am I coming to Australia next? Answer is as soon as I can. I miss you guys, and take care, and I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening, and stay safe.